Imagine winning a huge, triumphant victory that ends up sealing your party's doom. Well, that's the incredible story of the British general election of 1918, a political earthquake that completely reshaped the nation. Today, we're unpacking exactly how it all went down.
Okay, let's just jump right in. At the end of World War I, Prime Minister David Lloyd George is a national hero. They're calling him the man who won the war. But in securing this massive victory, he also lit the fuse that would basically blow up his own political party. So the question is, how on earth did he manage that?
To really get this election, you have to look past the trenches and the battlefields and into the halls of power in London. Because while the Great War might have been over, a different kind of war, a bitter civil war, was tearing the ruling Liberal Party completely apart.
Okay, so on one side, you've got David Lloyd George. He's the charismatic prime minister, the war hero. The thing is, though, he only leads a small breakaway faction of liberals. And on the other side, that's A.H. Asquith, the former prime minister that Lloyd George had kicked out of office. Asquith still controls the official party, the money, the local associations, the whole machine. And their rivalry wasn't just political, it was deeply, deeply personal.
So, and this is the crucial point, Lloyd George, a radical liberal, is only in power because he's being propped up by his lifelong political enemies, the Conservatives. His alliance with their leader, Bonar Law, was the only thing keeping his government afloat.
Now, you might be thinking, couldn't these two liberal factions just sort it out and patch things up? Well, any hope of that was completely and utterly destroyed by one single explosive debate in the House of Commons.
1918 was just this whirlwind of a year. You got this landmark of Voting Act, the end of the war itself, but for the Liberal Party, the point of no return, the moment everything changed, came in May. It all came down to a showdown known as the Morris Debate.
So a very senior general, a guy named Frederick Maurice, goes public with this absolute bombshell of an accusation. He claims that the Prime Minister, Lloyd George, has been lying to Parliament about how many British troops were actually on the Western Front. Asquith sees his chance and he pounces, calling for a vote of no confidence to try and bring the whole government down.
But the whole thing backfired, spectacularly. Lloyd George gets up in Parliament and delivers this masterful defense, basically claiming the numbers he used came from Maurice's own department. The government wins the vote in a landslide, 293 to 106, and Asquith's supporters are left looking weak and worse, unpatriotic for attacking the war effort. And yeah, that was pretty much it. The final nail in the coffin for liberal unity. The lines in the sand were drawn, the two sides were now in open warfare, which made a bitter, nasty post-war election pretty much inevitable.
So just a few weeks after the armistice is signed in November, Lloyd George calls a snap election. But this wasn't going to be just any old election. Oh no, this was going to be fought on a whole new set of rules, with millions of brand new voters.
And this is what makes this election so fascinating. You've got the Representation of the People Act, which basically tripled the number of voters overnight. For the very first time, all men over 21 got the vote, and, crucially, so did millions of women over 30. This was a democratic revolution, and honestly, nobody had a clue how this huge new electorate was going to vote.
So, to try and control this chaos, Lloyd George and his conservative partner Bonar Law come up with this brilliant and kinda ruthless idea. It gets nicknamed the coupon. It was a formal letter of endorsement, signed by both leaders, given only to candidates who promised to support their coalition. It was a clear signal to voters, this is one of our guys, an official government candidate.
And Lloyd George's public argument was basically this. Look, the job of rebuilding Britain after this devastating war is just as huge a challenge as fighting the war itself. We can't go back to the old petty party politics. He insisted the country needed a strong, unified government to get the job done.
So the results start to roll in. And on the surface, it looks like an absolute landslide for the coalition. But when you dig into the numbers, they tell a much, much more complicated story.
See, if you look at the popular vote, the coalition actually won less than half of it, just under 48%. The real surprise was the rising Labour Party, surging into second place with over 22% of the vote, and the official Asquith Liberals, they were just squeezed into a distant third with only 12%.
But, and this is a huge but, Britain's first past-the-post electoral system turned that minority of votes into a crushing, overwhelming victory in Parliament. The coalition took a staggering 478 seats. Labour, with its 63 seats, became the official opposition for the first time. And Asquith's Liberals utterly annihilated. reduced to a tiny rump of just 28 MPs. Asquith himself suffered the ultimate humiliation. He even lost his own seat.
So how did they pull it off? Well, a few things were going on. That coupon endorsement was incredibly effective. There was also this powerful, patriotic mood in the country. People wanted to vote for the men who won the war. But there was also a hidden advantage. The voting maps had recently been redrawn, creating a lot more seats in the suburbs, which were natural territory for the Conservatives.
So Lloyd George was triumphant. He got to stay on as prime minister, backed by a massive majority. But in winning the Battle of 1918, he had well and truly lost the war for his party's entire future.
And this is where the victory starts to look more like a trap. Because Lloyd George was now a prime minister without a real party. Think about it. He was a general with almost no army of his own. His group of coalition liberals was tiny. He was completely at the mercy of his 344 conservative partners, the very people he'd spent his whole career fighting against.
And with the benefit of hindsight, historians today don't see this election as a great victory at all. For the Liberal Party, which had dominated British politics for a century, it was a catastrophe, a fatal blow from which they would never recover.
And it's not just hindsight. People saw it happening even back then. As one former Liberal leader wrote, the split just drove their best people away. Progressive voters who once would have been liberal now flocked to the new Labour Party. More conservative-minded liberals drifted to the Conservatives. The party was just hollowed out from the inside, creating that Labour versus conservative dynamic that would define the rest of the 20th century. And that really is the ultimate paradox of the 1918 election. Lloyd George masterfully secured his own position at the top of British politics, but he did it by shattering the very political movement that had put him there in the first place. It was an incredible personal victory that led directly to his party's permanent decline. Which leaves us all with a pretty big question, doesn't it? Can a leader ever truly win if the victory itself destroys the very foundation of their power?